And it is showtime. Good afternoon if you are in the Texas or Florida area. And sure, you're noticing that my voice sounds a little rough, so sorry about that. Joe is going to do most of the talking today, but we have breaking news that kind of just developed today. So it's changed a little bit of the order that we're going to talk about things. But so glad if you were able to join us. We have some people hopping on. And hi, Joe.
Hi, how you doing?
Well, I am pretty good.
I was going to say your move-in look there with your studio is just impressive.
Yes, I have to organize a lot of stuff. If you guys don't know, I recently moved into a two-story house. And so I have to set up my studio and, you can hear the echo. I haven't been able to put up the vocal padding. And maybe that's why I'm a little run down and sick. So, but we have tons of slides to get into. Joe has done a lot of research and made some pretty great graphics to go with what we're talking about today. So, what are we talking about?
Well, it's kind of funny. You mentioned there is breaking news, and we're going to be talking about that. But the original intent was just to sort of cover a lot of the new updates for the Artemis program. Started about a week ago. NASA had their public meeting where they talked about the Artemis program, some of the delays that are coming up, some of their concerns. Kind of tied that in a little bit with Starship and its development to help support the Artemis program. There's also been a SpaceX all hands call that Elon addressed the company and talked about some of the aspects that relate to Artemis and also the Starship update. Recently, Lisa Watson Morgan from the HLS program manager's office, or she's the program manager. She had some updates as well about specifically the Starship, but again, relating to the Artemis program. And of course, at Everyday Astronauts Astro Awards, we had John Edwards from the Falcon 9 program there, and he provided a few updates as well. So all of this was really kind of an attempt. We were originally going to just cover all of that. And I thought, maybe what we would do is talk a little bit about context, talk about the Artemis program itself. What are the key parts? What is the profile, the mission profile, and why is it complex? And then how that ties into all of those updates that we got from NASA.
Right. Well, and you had to make two new slides today due to some developing news. So let me pull up the first slide. And yes, like you said, we're going to talk about NASA Artemis program updates. And hopefully you guys can read these slides. But like Joe mentioned, we've gathered new information from the Astro Awards, Elon's, hands-on talk recently that he gave to SpaceX and more. So let me know when you want me to.
Okay, and the other thing I would just mention here is, up until maybe an hour and a half ago, what all of this kind of supported is the current plan profile for the Artemis program as laid out by NASA. And, like I said, we've had a lot of other channels talk a little bit about this in the last week, and as some information has come in. But one of the things that they haven't done, I think, is to put it into that context, showing you all of the complexity of the various mission. And what is ironic about that is with this breaking news, and what it is it's the Returning to the Moon, Keeping Artemis on Track hearing that was just held at the House of Representatives. And the witness or the key speaker to that was Michael D. Griffin, who is a former NASA administrator, also worked in not only the Bush, but also the Trump administrations, and he has some ties back to the old Constellation program, which predated the Artemis program. And anyway, he was brought up to Congress, and he provided some of this information. And there's also a report. I didn't put the entire report here. There is a link, and I put on X on some of my thoughts on that, and you can go and read the entire report. But I will go through some of the highlights as we go through the Artemis description.
Yes, let's get into the nitty gritty. And is this the correct slide that you want me to have up? I know it's a little small, guys.
No problem. For right now, this is good because I just wanted to see you that there's actually a report, and this happened just today, and so we're still kind of trying to go through some of the information. But if I were to summarize it just real quick, and then we'll go into detail, is they're looking at the Artemis mission as it is envisioned right now by NASA, and this particular individual and this hearing was about, what are the risks with that? What is the complexity of that? They got into some of how does the contract process work and whether or not that is the right way of going. It draws a lot from the Apollo missions, and it offers up a new solution that would essentially, if this line of thinking were to progress and become part of policy, it would greatly change the Artemis program to something that is significantly less innovative, less forward-looking, and it would essentially be, in my opinion, based on what I read through here, and like I said, we'll go through some of the details, but it looks like it's essentially a space race mentality again. Let's get there quickly. Let's use an Apollo type approach, but it doesn't. None of that builds on the innovation of commercial space. It doesn't look into the future. It doesn't really build a infrastructure to keep us there. And it's essentially replaying what we did in the 60s, in my opinion.
Right. And I'm looking, is there any video of this, or is it looks like we're just able to find text?
This is all that I saw, and like I said, about an hour ago, this popped up. So
okay,
we're literally going through it for the first time here. If you go to the next slide, what I want to show you here is a couple of the quotes that stood out to me in the meeting, and also into this report that kind of supports what I just said. One of them here is, it's debatable whether in general commercial space, in quotes, is other than a catchphrase intended to differentiate traditional prime contractors from newer firms. In other words, the traditional companies, the Boeings, the Lockheeds, ULAs, the ones that have been in the business for decades and decades, versus the new upcoming ones like SpaceX, Blue Origin, Rocket Lab, all of the new commercial contractors that are coming on to the space forefront. And to me, it looks like this is just looking back. It's a looking back comment to the way things used to be. And I personally don't think that that's the right way of going. Another quote that stood out to me was, this has to do with contracts, and it says the unrealistic firm fixed price bids for complex development programs. And what this is getting into, I don't want to get into contract too deep, but there's a couple of different kinds of ways of contracting from the government to commercial industry. And one of them is something called a cost plus contract.
Right.
And that's essentially, hey, Ellie, I want you to make me something, and I want it to look generally like this. I would like it to cost $100, but if you can't get it done, or if delays come up, or if issues come up, $200, $300, $1,000, $500, whatever is fine with me. I'll just keep paying. And there are places for those types of contracts, but it tends to be very inefficient, and it tends to reward not getting things done and perpetuating that process.
Right. And if you just look at, SLS already, it's over budget and delayed. So, and I did find, by the way, there is a video. I don't know if you want to just play there's like a 2-hour stream of this exact conversation that we are talking about. So let me just play it for a second here. Oops.
While you're waiting for that, the other type of contract is that firm fixed price, and that's kind of hey, Ellie, will you do this for me? I'll pay you
Subcommittee on
$100.
Space and Aeronautics will come to order.
And it's just going to be $100.
Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess of the subcommittee at any time. Welcome to today's hearing entitled Returning to the Moon, Keeping Artemis on Track. And before I offer my opening statement, I would like to acknowledge that I appreciate our witnesses being here today. Mother Nature is proving to be somewhat challenging this week, as you can see by the turnout of membership. This has been a hearing that's been much anticipated by the members in a very enthusiastic way, but you have to physically get here. And that's a challenge we're working in. And Subcommittee Chairman Babin is in the air somewhere between here and Houston. So
while we're listening, I would like to just point out that this is 1 week after NASA provided their update
that I want to recognize
this program.
What was that?
I just want to point out that this hearing is about 1 week after NASA provided that update on the Artemis program. And that's where and we'll talk later, but we'll hear about some of the delays and some of the challenges with the program. And this is hot on the heels of that.
Yeah, we'll just try to hear if there's like any preliminary statement here, because I can't scrub through it, and I just found this video, so let's see what they say.
Recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Here we go.
Good morning, and I welcome everyone to the Science Committee's first hearing of 2024. It's fitting that we're kicking off the year with a hearing on Artemis, given its importance to our space program and to U.S. competitiveness. My top priority since becoming chairman of the Science Committee has been to ensure that American competitiveness and leadership in the fields of research and technology development. This includes U.S. activities in space, especially human exploration. The importance of U.S. leadership in space is why some of our top legislative priorities as Congress include a NASA reauthorization bill, which we'll consider this spring, and the Commercial Space Act. It has been almost 7 years since a comprehensive NASA authorization bill was signed into law, and that's simply too long for an agency of NASA's importance. Much has happened during that period, and this committee should provide direction to NASA's activities for the coming years, especially in the areas of human exploration. How we address future human exploration beyond low Earth orbit is undoubtedly a topic we'll address in the NASA authorization bill. Artemis is a cornerstone of that effort. I'm confident that I speak for everyone on this committee when I say we all support Artemis. This committee has long directed NASA to return humans to the moon and eventually Mars. But this committee's support of Artemis means asking detailed questions of NASA and providing oversight of the agency's proposals. Congress must have proper insight in the agency's planning and execution of this mission to ensure its success. This also means listening to inputs from external stakeholders and hearing differing viewpoints, which is why we've assembled a panel of witnesses with a variety of perspectives today. Last week, NASA announced the delay of Artemis 2 to September 2025 and Artemis 3 to September 2026. I look forward to hearing from NASA about the cause of these delays and potential impacts to future missions and about the steps it is taking to mitigate future risks. We have a responsibility to not only our constituents, but the international community to see that Artemis is executed in a timely and physically responsible manner without sacrificing safety. I remind my colleagues that we are not the only country interested in sending humans to the moon. The Chinese Communist Party is actively soliciting international partners for a lunar mission, a lunar research station, and has stated its ambition to have human astronauts on the surface by 2030. The country that lands first will have the ability to set a precedent for whether future lunar activities are conducted with openness and transparency or in a more restricted manner. I'm grateful to our panel for appearing before us today to share their experience and expertise, and I look forward to a productive discussion on how we can ensure the success of Artemis and the best way for the U.S. to be the world leader in human space exploration.
Okay, so you guys get an idea. And those are, let me go back to the slides here. Here were some of the quotes that you were able to get from the witnesses testifying today.
Right, and to point out what we just heard there is, it's kind of classic space race, but there's kind of two space races going on here. One is which country is going to get back there first, and in this particular case, it's a race against China and its partners. But it's not just getting back to the moon; it's where on the moon we're going. and it's
Right.
the South Pole. And the reason why is that there's suspected a lot of resources, particularly water. There may be some other chemicals or other components or compounds that are present on the South Pole that is really generating a lot of this interest in the race. So when he was saying there that we need to go back there, be competitive, and we can control what's going on, it's not saying, what part of the moon we're interested in. It's saying the South Pole region of the moon. And with that much smaller space, that really increases the competition that's going on.
Right.
But, another quote here, besides talking about the contracts, is the one on the bottom. And according to, at least with this witness and this report that was being given to Congress, is they're suggesting that NASA's responsibility is to acknowledge that the only significant customer for human missions to the moon, that is NASA, or in other words, a government agency.
Right.
And I personally don't agree with that. I understand the idea, but if you haven't looked at the last at least 10 years worth of development and what's going on now, as I've kind of thought of as the golden age of space industry, it reminds me of the 50s when aviation was just exploding, and there was a lot of companies making all kinds of different prototypes, experimenting with different kinds of aircraft. We haven't seen that level of explosion in aviation since the 50s or 60s, and we're seeing that with space now. And this kind of comment overlooks the fact that commercial interests are starting to become very important, even for the moon in this particular case.
Well, what do you think about this comment? Does anyone even care for NASA at this point? Government agencies are a joke, need much more private company successes.
On the surface, I kind of understand what you're trying to get at, but there is a definite need for NASA and commercial to work together. NASA can, instead of them building the machinery, the rockets, owning them, as we've done in the past, setting priorities, setting goals, pushing the industry, and then bringing along with it government seed money that's able to make those things happen, I think is still very important and will be important for a long time. Also, there will be missions coming up into the future, hopefully, that will require still the support of a government to make it happen. Commercial industry is still very, young at this point in time, and they still have to develop capabilities and develop reasons for us to go. Like, for example, if we go to the moon to take pictures, that's one thing. But if there's something there that turns out to be beneficial, maybe it's materials, maybe it's manufacturing, I think that will be important in the future. But between now and then, government agencies like NASA are going to play a big role.
Yeah, someone wanted me to see if I could make that concept of operations chart bigger. So I tried to make it a little bigger. And thank you, Michael, for the super chat. He says, Ellie Joe, the South and North Pole regions are close enough to the dark side line to make finding water ice close to the surface the best possibility.
Yeah, that is true, but I think right now most of the work that we've done, the scans, the imagery, and some of the analysis has been mostly on the South Pole. And as you saw with Chandrayaan 3, we're seeing with the Chinese program, we're talking about with Artemis. It seems like the South Pole is the place to go right now. He also brought up another point. Being on the South Pole or on the North Pole, you get a lot of shadowing from the sun, much more so than what we saw on the Apollo missions. So not only will that be a visual difference from what we saw in the 60s with the astronauts running around with the sun kind of overhead and almost looks like a noonday, there it's going to be very long shadows, very low sun in the sky, long periods of time where there may not be any sun at all. And that's going to complicate the ability for us to operate there, whether it's solar power, whether it's temperatures, the temperature extremes, the lengths and the sharpness of the shadows can also cause issues with mobility. And you may not even realize that there's a crater or an edge right next to you because of the way that the lighting will be. So yeah, valid point. They could go to either pole, but right now all of the effort seems to be the South Pole, and that's where most of the analysis have shown the possibility of having that water.
Well, I have to also say thank you to Bimmer Geezer, who has given us a very generous super chat of $50, and he says Ellie and Joe should have a regularly scheduled program. What do you think, Joe?
Sure, why not? I mean, we're going to see today that there's so much that we could talk about. We're not going to get through it, especially with breaking news like this.
Well, and show us your shirt.
This one here?
Yeah.
Starship first flight.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. And you were asking earlier where I got it. I got it from Amazon, believe it or not.
Yeah, it's crazy. Okay, so let's go back to the slides.
Okay.
Okay, so
yeah, what I want to show you here, that concept of operations, I wish it were not as blurry, but that's how it came out on the documents that at least were released. But I want to show you this briefly, and then we'll get into the Artemis slides, which are sort of similar to this, and we can talk through some of the points that they make in this article. But this concept of operations, this is the one that's being put forth on this report from Michael D. Griffin on that Returning to the Moon hearing. And as you can see here, it's quite a bit more streamlined, if you will, from what we would see. There's no Starship. It's just based on SLS. Which is built by Boeing. It's based on the Orion capsule, which is built by Lockheed, and it's based on using the Centaur upper stage, which is ULA, and a lander which has not been defined yet. So in other words, this would not be a SpaceX or a Blue Origin lander. It would be something new, and it would basically be an Apollo lander again.
right.
And this is what this particular report and what was briefed at Congress today is advocating for.
And we are disagreeing with.
Yeah, well, it's not very imaginative. It basically, with a few modifications, is Apollo 2, and that will win us a space race to say that we're there first, maybe. And with a caveat on that, and I'll talk about it in a second, but it doesn't build on anything.
Right.
It reminds me way back in the past, Werner von Braun, who was, part of our early space program, he advocated for, instead of going to the moon like we did, to build a low Earth orbit infrastructure first, so that we had a permanent, sustained location to go to and then go from there. And that never happened. We just went to the moon. And once we got to the moon, we're like, hey, we won the race. And then what? We didn't have a low Earth orbit infrastructure, and we had nothing in the moon. And this seems to be a replay. This suggestion or this recommendation seems to be a replay of exactly that.
Right. Well, and this user says, any ideas what happens if China gets there first? And I think in that opening statement, it's like they'll set the precedent. They'll maybe make the rules or claim the territories, right?
Well, yeah, it would also be potentially the first big test of some of the international agreements we have on the use of the moon.
Right.
And I guess this is building on the fear. Will China not follow those agreements and those customs? Will they claim the whole thing to themselves? If they find, heavy water, which would be useful for nuclear fusion as part of a material, or if they find water, or if they find something else there, will we not be able to have access to it? I think that's what all of this is being built on. But the reciprocal question is well, if we get there first, then what happens? Do we do the same thing?
Right.
So this is, to me, this is really not a very forward-looking way of approaching things by saying, you know, we got to get there first. Well, just because you get there doesn't mean that you can do anything with it.
Right.
You know, if we arrive with a small capsule, can we really claim that? I mean, what are we going to, I mean, how are we going to enforce that? You know, I don't know.
Right.
But anyway, so looking at some of these quotes, looking at this concept of operations, hearing a little bit of that intro kind of sets the stage to what we can talk about next. And that will be kind of the profiles for the Artemis program. And I think what I will do, and hopefully we'll get a lot of comments from some of the viewers as well, but compare and contrast that concept of operations with this. This is the Artemis 2 mission profile as it exists right now. And essentially what we're seeing is it relies on the SLS to get the Orion up into orbit.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Orion with its, its middle stage or mid stage will do the lunar orbital injection, go over to the moon, but it's just going to do a flyby. It'll just be an out and back. It's on a return trajectory back to the Earth. And it will have astronauts. This will be the first time humans go back to the moon, at least in this case, the vicinity of the moon, since 1972. So it's been 52 years since the last time we had humans there. And this is essentially a test mission to test out all of the various capabilities, the Orion, the capsule, the mid stage to get it up there, or the lunar orbital insertion stage, the Artemis again, the SLS again, and essentially just prove out all of this technology and setting the stage for Artemis 3. It's more complex than the Artemis 1 test flight, which had no people on it. And some of the findings that came out of that are some of the concerns that NASA had in their update meeting. There was some more delamination of the heat shield that they expected. There was some electrical issues that related to certain aspects of the launch abort system. And there was also some life support systems, specifically some valves that were causing some issues. So those things are what is part of the delay of Artemis 2, but this here is the basic profile. So you can see it's slightly more complex, but it's not really that complex. It's not even as complex as Apollo was because there's no lunar landing.
Right.
Okay, so this is what has been delayed to September 2025. Yeah. So we have another 18 months, 19 or 20 months or so before that takes place.
Do you think it will actually be in September 2025?
There's on one hand, there's the technical issues. I just mentioned 3 of them that they're trying to work with the Orion capsule. Those need to be resolved and resolved in a way that NASA feels like it's going to be safe for the astronauts, because with the astronauts, it's now, increased that level of difficulty a lot. But they want to make sure that all of those findings that they had from Artemis 1 are corrected for Artemis 2. The SLS itself for Artemis 2 is almost ready. I think they're getting ready to, or they should be being able to stack the boosters. There is sometimes a shelf life of the boosters once they are stacked, so they'll probably wait a little longer for that now that they have that delay. But I think Artemis 2 is possible by that time.
Yeah, we'll see. Okay, so next slide.
Yeah, so keeping that in mind, and also that concept of operations, how relatively simple this is. It's not simple, but there's just SLS Orion, the lunar insertion stage, and that's basically it as far as hardware for this stage of the Artemis program.
Right.
So now let's go to Artemis 3. And this is a slide that I put together. It's obviously much more complex. and that does reflect the complexity of the Artemis 3 and the Artemis 4 missions. The biggest difference between Artemis 3 and Artemis 4 when it comes to the profile is that gateway that I have in pink. As it currently is, Artemis 3 won't have the gateway, which is a lunar orbiting space station. And Artemis 4 is envisioned having that. And part of the reason why is the gateway is itself being built right now. They just awarded a contract to the UAE to do the docking port. And as the last that I had seen, they're going to be using a Falcon Heavy to launch parts of the gateway sometime in 2025. So obviously it won't be there. It won't be set up for the Artemis 2, and it doesn't need to be. For Artemis 3, now that it's been delayed to 2026, my question is will they modify the profile to use the gateway or not? I don't know if they will, but with the delay of Artemis 3, it now puts it after when potentially the gateway would be sent up. So that's why I have it in pink. It's sort of a question mark right now.
Right.
But anyway, a couple of things I guess we could talk about one is the complexity of this is what that report and the discussion at the Congress today was all about. And
Right.
as you can see, there's a lot. You have the Starship, you have a orbiting either Starship that's been filled up or a orbiting depot that would be required because they're going to need to have some propellant refilling in orbit for the Starship HLS variant. Then at some point, the HLS will have to, the Starship HLS will have to go to lunar orbit. If there's no lunar gateway, it'll just go into orbit by itself and wait for the Orion capsule to arrive at whatever date. So, not only do we have the complexity of the Starship, the depot, or the in orbit refilling, but we also have the HLS lander itself, and then having to get to the lunar orbit and wait.
Right.
And how long is it going to wait? Another aspect of the discussion today or I guess you saw it, criticism of the report at Congress was one, the number of refilling missions that would be required. And we heard last week at that NASA update from the SpaceX representative, first name is Jessica, I can't remember her last name, but she said it was basically up to about 10 refueling that would be needed. So, if you think about that, that's 10 launches of a tanker Starship to refill something, whether it's a in orbit a depot or maybe just another Starship that just gets filled up. And all that has to happen before they can launch the HLS lander to rendezvous with that to refill. So that was something that in the report today was highlighted, and they call that, obviously it's a complex addition to the Artemis 3 program. And every time you add another mission, another trip, another touch point, it adds more risk, and that's what they're kind of highlighting as well. And if we look at that concept of operations that they mentioned today in that report and at that hearing, it didn't have any of the refueling at all. It just relied on, I think it may be the second version, I think Block 1B of the SLS, and using the Orion capsule and that Centaur just to get it to lunar orbit. So it dispenses with any of that refueling. So that's a aspect of this Artemis 3 profile as it exists right now. And then, whether it's the lunar gateway or if it's just an orbit itself, the HLS will be there until NASA launches the SLS with the Orion to rendezvous with it. So that's yet another complexity. It's another launch system. It's another spacecraft, and it's another timing element that would be needed for that rendezvous to take place.
Right.
And, that was something else that they talked about here. Another thing, did you have a question, or is there another viewer question?
Oh, no, just let me know when you want to switch slides.
Okay. Well, I guess the other thing that I will talk about, it relates to the HLS lander, the Starship in orbit, whether it's with the Gateway or not, and it also relates to Blue Origin's lander. Specifically, the comments on the meeting today was targeted at Blue Origin, but it's also equally important toward the Starship, and that is cryogenic fluid boil off. And how long can you be in orbit and not burn off too much or boil off too much of that cryogenics and then have nothing left? So they were talking about that specifically with the Blue Origin lander, because they use hydrogen, and hydrogen is much more difficult. It's much cooler, and it's easier for it to boil off and to be lost from its amount of propellant. But that would also apply to the Starship as well, because they can't go up there and indefinitely wait.
Right.
After a certain period of time, they would have to refill as well. So that was another thing that they kind of highlighted today.
Well, I like this comment, too many cooks spoil the broth.
Well, if what we're talking about is the multiple different launch vehicles and other, that is very true. It's sort of a double-edged sword. On one hand, we talk about we want to have redundancy. Mm-hmm. And in this case, we have some redundancy, but we also have a lot of complexity. And if you really look at that slide again, there's several areas that there's truly not any redundancy. And that is, if the HLS lander Starship can't get refueled, then we have no way of getting to the moon. If too much of the cryogenics boil off while it's on the moon, we can't get off the moon. There's no other way. If the Orion spacecraft doesn't work properly, we can't get the astronauts back in it. There's no other way of bringing the astronauts back. So, I think that's what the gist of this report today is trying to get at. But I would also point out that if you look at their concept of operations, there's no redundancy either. You still have one Orion, you have one lander, and in this case, you have one launch system. So I don't know if their solution is really, addressing that redundancy or not.
Right. We do have a question. Thank you again for the super chat. Why don't you read the question? I feel like my voice sounds really
Joe and Ellie, what is the possibility if SpaceX using Falcon 9 or Falcon Heavy as a fuel transport along with Starship to speed up the HLS refueling? I think the very reason why, by the way, thank you, Michael Maxey, for that super chat. I think the reason why we have Starship in the first place is because Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy, one, wouldn't be very efficient for that because the amount of propellant that they could take. And two, the Falcon Heavy, Falcon 9 don't use the same fuels or propellants. They do have liquid oxygen, but the Falcon 9, Falcon Heavy uses, what is it? An RPG. It's just it's a rocket fuel. It's a carbon-based rocket fuel, whereas the Starship uses a methylox, a methane. So it really wouldn't be an efficient way of doing it. And the Starship also is going to be transferring fuel from its main tanks. It's kind of very similar to the KC-135 I used to fly. Is the fuel in the tanks was the same fuel that we used for the plane and also what we offloaded to the receivers. So the Falcon 9, Falcon Heavy would have to have as cargo another tank, so it would be very inefficient, and the mass that it would add would probably, greatly limit how much it could take to orbit. But good question.
We do appreciate the questions and the super chats. Thank you. So let's go back to the slides, and maybe should we go to the next?
Yeah. Before we do that, just this is the overall look. We'll go through each individual ones, and then we'll talk a little bit more about some of the specific questions that they had there too. But overall, what I'm trying to get across here is just how much more complex the Artemis 3 and 4 missions are when it comes from vehicles, the activities, the scheduling, and not to mention the fact that we're going to actually land on the moon this time as opposed to Artemis 2. And I think, this complexity is what is driving a lot of the questions right now. So,
Right.
so yeah, if you want to go to the next slide, we can. It'll clean it up a little bit.
Oh, wow.
So, like I said, the Starship HLS has to do that refueling, and you can see how that would happen. And you can go to the next slide because we kind of covered that. Then, at the appropriate time, the Starship would proceed over to lunar orbit, and as I mentioned, it would either be orbiting by itself for Artemis 3 potentially, or docking with the lunar gateway, and that would most likely be for Artemis 4. And then you can go to the next slide.
Okay.
And of course, this is, we already talked about the SLS launching the Orion proceeding from low Earth orbit, or actually a translunar injection, up to either rendezvousing directly with the Starship HLS, and that would require that the Starship has a docking port on it, which is going to be something that SpaceX is going to have to develop as part of the HLS lander. Or it would dock with the lunar gateway, and then the astronauts would get out of the Orion craft, go into the lunar gateway, and then get into the Starship and get ready to go down to the moon. And then, of course, the lunar gateway with the Orion, or just the Orion itself, would stay in the orbit around the moon while the Starship goes down and comes back up. And I guess this might be as good of a place as any. If you can fast forward through a couple of slides to where I show the near rectilinear halo orbit. Two more. Yeah, so I was originally going to use this as just, if somebody asked, but in the report today and in the discussion with Congress, this particular orbit came up as one of the concern points, and that concept of operations would get rid of the near rectilinear halo orbit for something more similar to what the Apollo mission would be. So let's first talk about what this is, and then we can talk about what the criticism is on this particular report. A near rectilinear halo orbit sounds like it's really, really complex, but it's really, if you want to think about it, it's a way of orbiting the moon in the least energy required state. So it's somewhat stable. It requires very little propellant to maintain that orbit. It would have to have a orbit maneuver maybe once a week or so, with a little bit just to keep it in that orbit. From the point of view of the Earth, if you were looking from the Earth towards the moon and you were watching that orbit, it would be orbiting in such a way that the Orion craft or the lunar gateway is always visible to the Earth. So as far as communication, that would be very helpful, because it never goes behind the moon. We wouldn't have the communication blackout periods. It also tends to be very eccentric in its orbit. What that means is it's not a perfect circle. It would basically be outlining a path that is roughly elliptical, not quite, but it would be very close at the pole, at the paraloon or the perigee, or the closest point of the orbit, probably about maybe 2,000 miles or so, which is, what is that, about 5,000 kilometers or something. And then at the apogee, or the apoloon, the highest point, it could be around as far as 70,000 miles away. So that's pretty significant, but that not only offers that Earth-facing look for the communication, but it also gets you into an environment around the cislunar environment, so you could do a lot more science than you could necessarily just directly next to the moon. It also is very well suited for pole missions. So if we're going to go to the South Pole, which is the stated objectives, this type of orbit is very conducive to getting to a pole region of the moon.
And here's another super chat. So thank you, Michael. He's given the most super chats so far.
Excellent. So NASA wants to use HLS Starship mainly as an equipment transport vehicle for building an operational lunar base. Thank you again, Michael. During the update last week for NASA, they mentioned that they had a new requirement is the contracts with SpaceX and Blue Origin to have a cargo only variant of those two landers. And I think that goes directly what you're saying here. And if the point is to get to the moon and build a base so that we can stay, bringing a lot of cargo will be necessary. And having a cargo only variant of both of them, I think, would definitely be important. I would like to point out that currently, other than the Artemis planned missions, there aren't any cargo only missions. So those would have to be added to the manifest, to the schedule. And most likely those would all happen after Artemis 4, which is already at the end of 2028.
Oh.
So, okay. Any updates on what they will do with the HLS after it has completed its mission? That's another very good point. I promise I'll get back to that when we go back to the slides showing what comes up afterwards, because that's not well defined. And I take that to mean the HLS lander for the demo landing, which SpaceX is on contract to do, an unmanned demo landing, and then the actual landing. Will that be the same Starship? Will it be a different one? And then what happens after Artemis 3 to that? So we'll talk about that in just a bit. But going back to the halo orbit, in the report and the testimony today, they highlighted some of the negatives that has to do with the near rectilinear halo orbit. One of which is what I just said about it being very elliptical and very far away from the moon. They point out that if there were an issue on the surface of the moon where they needed to leave right away and get back to the Orion capsule or to get back to the lunar gateway, because of the nature of this orbit, there's a window of about 6.5 days where they would not be able to take off to rendezvous. And that's very unlike what happened with the Apollo missions. The Apollo missions, the orbit was much closer to the moon. It was very circular. It was very kind of equatorial, and they could launch in much shorter periods of time and get back to the in that type the command module in a fairly short period of time.
Now, was any of those testimony statements that you got or witness statements from Mr. Griffin?
Yes, that was in the report.
So,
go ahead.
Yeah. I scrubbed to a point in the video where he's talking. Do you think it might be helpful just to...
Maybe. I haven't seen it, so I'm not sure what he will talk about. But if it has to do with this, I think that will add.
Well, I can't guarantee, but let's see what he's saying here.
For the clarification of others.
In my judgment, China, and I don't want to say China, I want to say the Chinese Communist Party, fully understands and frequently says that their goal is to be the world's great power. They regard the Western democracies as decadent and outmoded and ineffective and inefficient. China's president, he has other titles, Xi, bullies neighboring countries, presumes to take control of international waterways, supervises a military establishment that has recently sunk other people's ships fishing in their own waters. Everything about the behavior of the Chinese Communist Party suggests that they are their adversary, and they say so. To allow a situation to develop where the human frontier is populated by our adversary and we are not there should be unacceptable to this nation and to our Western and Asian partners.
Yeah,
It
can you
should be
hold
unacceptable.
it there for a second?
We are not on.
I'm going to sort of editorialize and give you my opinion on this, and I don't know if it will be popular or not, but this is off the top of my head. All right. This is almost exactly what we heard in the early 1960s with the space race, with, you know, the Russians are going to do this, the Russians are going to do that. We have to put all of our eggs into one basket. We got to beat them to the location. And we did. And we put a lot of effort into making that happen. And then we never went back.
Right.
It's been over 50 years. So what did we do to build on those accomplishments based on this line of thinking? So what is that going to do for us now? So that's my editorial on that particular thing.
We want to see Joe heated. We want to see you mad.
Well, I'm not the angry astronaut. I was actually thinking about that when I was making the slides. Is I don't want to turn it into that, but you know, my background is I was inspired by what happened with the Apollo missions. I wanted to be an astronaut. I was growing up during the period when the space shuttle was coming online and all that. And I was really excited about where we would be going. And, you know, now I look back, I didn't achieve that, but part of it was because we greatly reduced what we were doing. We didn't build on any of those gains. All of the people that gained that experience, that had that knowledge, that made Apollo happen, we lost those generations. We could have built so much more, but again, I'm kind of editorializing, but when I hear this line of thinking, this is more flag waving, in my opinion. And, you know, if we take an Apollo mission back and we land and we say we beat you, so what? We've already done that. It's not winning us anything, in my opinion.
Right.
And I don't know what your viewers think, but hopefully I'm not getting too crazy here.
Yeah, well, Ross just made the comment, political commentary about China as a rival is designed to provoke more funding from Congress.
Yeah, I agree, but that funding isn't to sustain us. It's to plant a flag, you know. If we turn our way away from, and I'm not saying that SpaceX is perfect or the Starship is perfect. I'm not saying that, but if we turn away from technologies like that, then we are certainly not going there to stay.
Yeah. Well, you have a lot of people saying they agree with you. So do you want to go back to playing that statement or back to the slides?
Yeah, let's listen a little bit more. I haven't heard anything what he said. So
I know that's why it's kind of interesting because I don't think a lot of people have seen the actual link here. So
On a path to recognize that. The rest of the world looks and will always look to the nations that occupy the frontier and exploit the frontier and extend the frontier as leaders of the world. I believe that's a position that the United States should occupy in preference to our adversaries. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gray. And you mentioned frontier. Add to that ultimate military high ground. Whoever controls space will control the destiny of this Earth.
As you know, I've spent considerable time in the national security side of our space programs as well, and I really consider them to be one program. But I came here today to discuss civil space, sir, and we can discuss military space at another occasion.
Yeah, can you stop it for a second?
Make it our goal to ensure that we emerge as first.
Okay, it's funny. Again, I'm just reacting to it. So here you go. He's talking in terms of military necessity, objectives, controlling the high ground, that kind of thing. And yet he says he's at a commercial space, and we'll have to separate that and talk another time. But it doesn't seem like he can separate the two. And most of the discussion has to do with the military possession kind of things. And having been in the military, I spent my whole career, I definitely understand that line of thinking, but I don't really think that that's the way we need to look forward and build our permanent stay on the moon.
yeah, that was interesting. I think it's actually really interesting to listen to this and then pause it and kind of hear your commentary and talk about it a little bit. What do you think?
That's fine. This is all I'm literally seeing it for the first time here, so and I'm kind of reacting, and part of my I don't know, disappointment of what we've done with space is coming through right
Yes. Well, you're always trying to be Mr. Positive, but there's some not positive things going. Okay, let me play a little bit more of it here. Okay. Here.
Among equals, when it comes to setting standards, we've had a couple of hearings on that.
Well, the standards are set by the people who show up. They're not set by the people who watch what happens with others. So by returning to the moon in a focused and expeditious manner, which we are not today, we will inevitably we will be required to bring along communications and navigation and other infrastructure systems, which we expect others will use as well. By that mechanism, we will have established the standards, just as we did with the ICAO starting at the end of World War II for global air transport. But again, those are facts on the ground that are created by the people who are on the frontier first. They're not created by the people who follow.
Thank you, Doctor. Ms. Kerner, what specific steps are being taken to address what some consider to be the outdated gas and propellant pipelines and other ground systems at Kennedy Space Center to ensure that we have the capacity to support our booming commercial space sector?
So the infrastructure at the Kennedy Space Center, as well as at all of our centers, is very much aging, and we are aware of that within the agency. I will tell you from an Artemis perspective, we are investing heavily in the capabilities that we need to support the Artemis missions. Last year, we had over 70 launches from this Florida Space Coast. It's an exciting time for all of us in the space industry. Most of those were on the Cape side, but we also had a number of them from our side at the Kennedy Space Center. And in order, in order to support those, we have poured heavily, as I said, into the infrastructure. But we also recognize that there's still more that is needed there. Many of the launches from that area are commercial in nature, and we have use agreements with our commercial and industry partners that allow them to actually invest in the infrastructure as well. We know as an agency.
Yeah, a couple of things. One, he was mentioning the ICAO. It's also known as ICAO. That's the International Civil Aviation Organization that sets forth the policies and procedures of how aircraft operate throughout the world. And I guess he's proposing that we need to have a version of that set by presumably the United States for operations in and around the moon. But what he omits is ICAO is international. So it's an international body of multiple different nations that, have set forth those agreements. So it looks like Luke wants us to do more of these.
I was going to say, I really like this format of like watching something together and interacting. I mean, a lot of people on YouTube do that, with like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it is interesting because it forces us to have to react with what we see. But what she was talking about here is interesting, is it doesn't matter which system, concept, whatever that we go forth, the infrastructure is always going to need upgrades. And what she just said is by having commercial partners using the systems and investing, it's actually helping NASA much more than just seeking funding from the government to be able to put into these infrastructures by themselves. Right. So to me, it sounds like Catherine Kerner is an advocate then for continued commercial space, at least from an infrastructure standpoint, because it's putting NASA farther ahead, and it would support any of those concepts, including the one being put forth here today. Right.
Let's just play a little bit more, unless you want me to scrub. Let's see if that other guy comes up again. Yeah. Mr. Griffin.
See, everybody asking me, why don't I put timestamps on stuff? They need to put timestamps.
Oh, yeah, they don't have timestamps. They don't have even captions, so I can't like scrub it here. Let's see here. Let's see what he says.
Assistant program to return to the moon and stay, that there are an enormous number of infrastructure development opportunities available in which commercial industry can invest because they know that there will be a return. So I mentioned communications, navigation functions earlier, command and data handling, data storage. The CLIPS program was brought up. There will be a need in supplying a human lunar base for all types of cargo, ranging from small, high-value items to bulk cargo that industry could supply if they know that there is going to be a consistent market for such.
And I think that's an important part is we're not just going back to the moon, we're going back to the moon to stay on the moon.
I would hope so, although I've been trying for over 30 years to promote such an activity and have so far failed, so I possibly should retire from the field.
No, don't do that.
I agree.
Ding, 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 ding.
Yeah. I don't know. I think he made a very good case for going ahead with looking towards the future and developing new technologies, new capabilities, doing exactly what we're doing, partnering with commercial partners. Because as he just said, he's been in this business for over 30 years. He's been trying to get this to happen, and it has yet happened. And maybe the way he approaches things, I'm kind of being too personal on it, but this is why we need to look towards the future. We need to bring different ideas, different capabilities, and try out things, you know?
Right. Well, here's another super chat from Ross, one of my favorite subscribers, always asking great questions. He says he always appreciates the audience interaction, and he's very impressed with the extensive knowledge that Joe has of Artemis, and so am I, and that's why you're doing most of the talking.
I'm hoping not boring anybody, but this is my true passion. I mean, this is what I've been wanting to do. I've been interested in it for all my life.
Well, I think it's kind of funny that, you know, you are full-time Giga Texas, but you have so much knowledge about space. It's crazy. I mean, really. And I did want to bring up, this is a side tangent. Sorry, we'll keep this quick, but Rob Maurer just announced that he's no longer going to do Tesla Daily for kind of a reason that, you know, he's saying, we already know Tesla's not going to fail. I don't think these daily updates are necessary. Do you ever foresee that with Giga Texas? Do you ever foresee, you know, an end to day or weekly coverage?
Eventually, yeah. I mean, everything comes to an end. Right now, my focus is always predominantly on the construction of Giga Texas and what's going into it, not necessarily the production of the models or the Cybertrucks, whatever, which everybody's interested in. So from that perspective, there are a lot of very interesting things still going on at Giga Texas that I would like to know about and see. You know, like for example, the Boring Company doing a tunnel. How is that going to work? There's other projects that I've been made aware of that whether they come to pass or not, but it's beyond just Giga Texas that the Boring Company has kind of in their sights. And it could be things from making a tunnel to the airport, downtown, or so forth. And maybe this is the one that they're doing at Giga Texas is maybe it's a proof of concept to kind of demonstrate what they can do and then build from there. So those kinds of things I think are very interesting. But you know, for the short term, I'm going to continue to try to do it as long as Mother Nature lets me.
Well, I'm sure if you ever ran out of stuff, my viewers would love if you would focus on Starbase and you and I had a weekly Starbase update.
You know, if only we could move Starbase a lot closer here, that'd be great.
Yeah.
But I'm not opposed with doing that. I mean, the way my schedule is right now, we could work around it. So.
Yeah, definitely. I want to play a little bit more of this.
Okay.
I'm having fun with it. I think it's really interesting to kind of play it and watch it with you.
Gentleman yields back. You never give up. Speaking of never giving up, I recognize the gentleman from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Associate Director, you talked about reducing the mortality or potential mortality. We've lost 15 astronauts over the years. I guess my question is, what statistic or fact would show that we've become safer over time in space?
So I don't know that I could point to a single statistic, but what I will tell you is that we have more redundancy in our systems, we have more reliability in our systems, we have more capability in our systems. And I think that alone gives us a greater confidence that even though we're doing something that is extremely, as I said earlier, unforgiving, that we have more safeguards and safety in the system.
Well, I understand, but today we're looking at significant delays in doing something that we did before. Nobody died going to the moon and back. As a matter of fact, the program that killed most of our astronauts was the cost-saving, redundant use, new and improved shuttle. Ultimately, that program killed the majority of all astronauts that ever died. The early exploration had its death, including 3 on the ground. We learned from that, don't sit in a bag of oxygen on the ground, not able to get off the ship quickly. So there have been lessons, but I've listened for quite a while to this discussion about the spacesuit and what we're going to do, and the discussion as though that women were new to space. I'm sorry, but we've had women in space for longer than some members of Congress have lived now. So I'll ask again. We're looking at overruns and delays, and so I think I'll go to Mr. Russell. When they're putting that figure out there, we've had 2.9% of all those who have gone to space have died. So it's not an insignificant number, but if you take away 2 events of a single program type, you suddenly go from nearly 700 flights and 19 dead to almost nobody in the rest of those flights. So when we're looking at the cost and delivery, are we in fact looking at Artemis looking for new solutions to things which have already been solved? I'm from the generation of the joke about the difference between our inverted writing instrument and the Russians. Okay, and for those who haven't seen it, exactly.
Yeah, I think this is a long way of him getting to the point that he's essentially saying, why are we going to try anything new when we've already got stuff that has done it in the past? And the answer to that lies, and by the way, the loss of people is something that is tragic. It's something that as we go into the future, as with any technologies, that we're going to have risks, but throughout time we've faced those risks and we've gone on and we've learned a lot and we've developed beyond where we began before we started. But the point that he was trying to make about, we've already proven this technology, just use what we had. Again, it's kind of overstating or underestimating what we're really trying to do. If the purpose is to go back to the moon and stay, we cannot use the technology that we had before, period. Which means we're going to have to use new stuff and we're going to have to develop it. We're going to have to try it. And we're going to learn a lot, and there may actually be some tragedies along the way. And I'm not trying to underestimate those or say that that's, not worth being worried about, but I think it's part of moving our way to the future. I mean, if we look back at aviation, and if we had not worked past some of the tragedies that happened while we also developed the technology, we wouldn't have the really, really safe systems that we have today. So I guess I'm not sure exactly where I'm going with this, other than the fact that his preamble brought to the point where we just got to use what we already have, and I think that's very short-sighted.
Right.
And I agree with Ross there. The delay of Artemis 2 is to recertify the Orion heat shield. I think that's, the Orion capsule, the heat shield, the launch escape system electronics, and possibly some battery systems, and also the life support are things that do need to be resolved. And I think that's what added to the Artemis 2 delay. And then I think the concerns about the development of Starship is what is looking towards Artemis 3. We need to continue to develop those programs. The added time is going to allow us to do that. But fundamentally, is we do need to develop all these new technologies. And I don't agree with what Mr. Issa said there about just we've already solved this problem. He's pointing up the pin. I think what he's trying to talk about is NASA was attempting in the 60s to come up with a pin that could be used in zero-G, inverted, and all these different kind of conditions, and the costs were high and all that. And well, the Russians just use a pencil. We don't have to use that issue. So, I understand that, but are we saying that pencils are good? We don't need laptops? We don't want to develop that technology?
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Well, do you want me to play any more of it?
Sorry, I'm on a roll. I'm sorry.
You're good. Do you want to keep playing it, or do you want to go back to the slides?
I don't know. We can, he was actually talked about the spacesuits. I don't know if we could find where they were talking about that, but I do have a slide on the spacesuits, and that's kind of interesting.
Let's go to that, because we're just freestyling.
Sounds like a plan. It's like, I don't know, a few slides beyond this.
Okay.
A couple more. There you go.
There we go.
All right. Well, it's actually kind of good. They had the slide, they mentioned it. I don't know how many of your viewers know this or not, but NASA was actually developing their next spacesuit. And he had mentioned, the fact that, we just discovered there's women astronauts. What he's getting at is that the spacesuits, certainly for the Apollo missions and also the ones on the ISS, were generally designed for men. And women that are using it have to use the same spacesuits that may be slightly modified or so forth, but they're not necessarily directly made for women. And the spacesuits that have been on the ISS are quite old. They've been there for very, very long time. They haven't had any upgrades. So NASA was trying to not only come up with a spacesuit that would be suitable for EVAs out of the ISS, but also to develop spacesuits that would be suitable on surface of, say, the moon or Mars, specifically the moon. And both of those environments are very different. The ISS, you're not in a dusty environment. You do have to worry about micrometeorites. You have to worry about, catching on something and maybe ripping the suit. You have some of the environmental systems that are within it. The current spacesuits on the ISS, they've had problems with water. That doesn't sound like a big deal to you. You think, well, what's so wrong with having a little bit of water in the spacesuit? Well, the thing is that you can't wipe it off of your head, your eyes. You can't wipe it off of your nose. If it gets too much, you could literally drown in the spacesuit. And trying to get in really quickly to take it off is not something that happens very quickly. So all of these things they've been trying to develop, and in 2022, they basically terminated their programs that they had been spending quite a bit of money on to develop those spacesuits, and they decided to award contracts, and they did it to two companies, Collins Aerospace and also Axiom Space, and these are two of their prototype suits. I know the one Axiom is black, and everybody talks about how cool that looks, but eventually it won't be black. They'll need to use it white for heat rejection, among other things. But this process of building these spacesuits that would be usable not only for ISS, but also on the moon, that's another level of complexity. And I think the process of building these spacesuits is taking a little bit longer. This is particularly important for Artemis 3, which would envision a landing and getting out of the lander to do stuff. So this is one of those critical path elements within the Artemis program that needs to be solved. It's not so much of an issue for Artemis 2, but definitely for Artemis 3. So in addition to the Orion capsule issues and the space suit issues, it was also the development of the Starship. Those are the three key issues that NASA had highlighted as their their concern areas and why the Artemis missions were delayed. Interestingly enough, besides, I don't know if anybody has any questions about these particular suits right now. But while we're waiting, if you go to the next slide, interestingly enough, SpaceX, not on contract with NASA, is also developing their own spacesuit. They're going to be using, the Polaris Dawn mission, which is coming up right now later this year. You can see the crew here, Jared Isaacman, which everybody knows from Inspiration 4. But they also have Scott, Sarah, and Anna, and they're going to be doing all kinds of different science experiments. And in addition to doing a spacewalk at EVA, which would be the first commercial EVA, they're also going to go on a very high orbit. And I think it may actually break the record of I think Gemini. Some people say Gemini. I'm an old school guy. Back in the day, it was actually called Gemini. But one of those missions actually set the record for the farthest away from the Earth other than Apollo. And Polaris Dawn is going to be very close to that altitude. So they'll be able to test radiation. They'll be in or near the Van Allen radiation belt. So that'll be very different. But they're also going to do this space EVA. So SpaceX is developing this suit. And they're also, because they're thinking later on they're going to go to Mars, they're developing a variant of that also that could be used on the moon or the Mars. So we have 2 on contract with NASA. We have 1 with SpaceX. We have 3 different spacesuits being developed right now. And, what's kind of interesting, depending on how things work out, is SpaceX may be in a very good position to not only have the landing vehicle, the launch vehicle, and the spacesuit all by themselves.
Wow, it's crazy.
But so all these new designs also take into account whether you're male or female, not only the size and the proportion differences, but the biological differences as well. And I think that will really help with space exploration as we go into the future.
Right. Let's see,
So that's what he was getting at, is these things.
what is this next slide?
Which one is that? This slide, as I mentioned, NASA had identified 3 large areas that they were worried about: the Orion capsule and what they need to do to recertify it, the spacesuits, and they also mentioned the Starship HLS development.
Right.
And within that group, the 3 main things that they were concerned with is the ongoing Starship development, which we all are going down to Starbase to watch. The orbital in-flight propellant transfer is critical. As we mentioned earlier, right now they're estimating 10 launches needed to either fill up the depot or have the Starship ready to go with enough propellant to go to the moon, do its mission. And as I had mentioned earlier, what happens after that? What I understand right now, the plan is that after Artemis 3 is done, then the Starship HLS will return to low Earth orbit and be able to be refueled again and then go back. Mm-hmm. And of course, that brings up the question: when they do the demo launch and landing and everything goes well, will that be the same one that they use for Artemis 3, or will it be a new one that they send up there? And if that's the case, what happens to the one that did the landing and the demo? That's property of SpaceX. And if it's still in orbit, it's still operational. Who's to say SpaceX couldn't use it? Right. Just because they're in contract for Artemis doesn't mean that they can't do a Dear Moon type mission of their own. Maybe Jared Isaacman would be leading a crew to go land on the moon with that, So it's very interesting what might happen, but that in-flight propellant transfer is critical. And then, of course, and when we talked about this at the Everyday Astronaut Awards briefing meeting ceremony briefly, is the HLS Starship lander has to be developed, and they do that unmanned testing, but it has to, and I'm going to ask you this, Ellie, because I'm talking too much. If you're going to have something that you develop that lands, don't you think you need to be able to test it landing somewhere?
Yeah.
Yeah. So where would that be?
Are you talking about at Starbase?
Yeah, because if they demonstrate the ability of catching a ship, which is in the past they have said, although I think they're moving away from that a little bit, that does nothing for the HLS landing.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So they don't have a landing pad at Starbase anymore.
Yeah.
So what and I don't know, but it's my question. What is SpaceX going to do to prove out a HLS lander leg system that could be used on the moon?
What are your guys' theories? You think they will do?
Well, I'm not sure what your viewers are going to say. I mean, it is an open question, but to me, logically, they have to do some testing with it, and the first test can't be on the moon.
Yeah.
So, will it be some hops?
Okay, yeah, we just heard that.
Yeah.
Ross says SpaceX should do hop tests for lunar Starship. Glenn suggests maybe practice landing in the Mojave Desert.
Okay. Glenn, I don't know if are you saying after, say, a test launch and it goes orbit that it comes back and it lands in the Mojave? Is that what you're saying, or would you just take a test item out to the Mojave and try to hop it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we need a giant lake for terraforming. I think they'll use the moon.
So Nerdy Native thinks that they'll just, the very first time that they use the legs is on the moon.
Arnie thinks maybe landing on a drone ship.
The size of the HLS lander for a drone ship, I don't think would be possible. Certainly not with the drone fleet that they have right now.
Really? Wow.
Well, just look at the size. I mean, when a Falcon 9 lands, if it's perfectly on center, it takes up most of that yellow ring.
Yes.
And I think the diameter of the legs extended is the same as the diameter of a Starship.
Right. Well, Steve says, remember, HLS can't re-enter a hotbed Starbase is all they need.
Okay, that is very true. And that goes to the 2 points I was saying is once the HLS is done doing its demo, it's still in orbit, theoretically, so SpaceX could use it. But as far as if they did a hop at Starbase, they're going to have to build some infrastructure to do that. And I haven't seen any discussion of that infrastructure right now.
Right.
So kind of jumping a little bit to Starship development and what we're seeing for 2024, what we have to see in 2024. In fact, everything that we've talked about today, the Artemis profile, the testimony at the Hill, the complexity of the mission, I hope, I don't know, I'm kind of losing my thought on that, but I hope that it really gives you an idea of how vital 2024 is for Starship development if we're going to do all of the things that Artemis says, and if we're going to have a Artemis 3 landing on the moon September 2026. So, 2024 has got to be an incredibly successful year for Starship development. I think that they need to get at least 5 flights done this year. And along the way, they need to develop that HLS lander. And I think that they need to have an ability to do landing tests. And I think all of that has to happen in 2024. The reason why I say that is in the NASA meeting, one of the things that they said, and I have it on a slide here, we don't have to go to it, but they stated that the demo landing by Starship, not only are they on contract to do it right there, but it's sometime in 2025. And that's still the goal. So if they're going to actually go to the moon and land on the moon as their demo to prove that Artemis 3 can happen in 2025, think of everything that they have to do between now and then.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm saying, 2024 to me may be the most critical year and certainly a long time in space development, and not just for SpaceX too, because the Orion has to have all of its fixes done in 2024, the bulk of them. The spacesuits have to have their stuff done. Starship has to be able to not only prove that it can fly without blowing up, but they can reuse the boosters. They can get to orbit. They can do stuff in orbit. I think on the next slide, it may even say what IFT3 objectives are. I don't know if you can go to that next slide. Yeah. Achieve orbit, Raptor engine relight, and that could be for a couple of reasons. It could be that they want to demonstrate that they can do it, which is a complex thing when you're in orbiting and you have microgravity and what's happening to the propellants. It could be that they are demonstrating that they can do a deorbit burn. And in my opinion, IFT3, the orbit insertion will have a perigee in the atmosphere, which means it will naturally return like they had in IFT 1 and 2 plan. But I think they'll do an engine relight to try to not only prove that they can do that, but also to further direct where it's going to come down. The fact that it will be in an orbit that will naturally return, I think, is important, because if the Raptor doesn't relight, you don't want it to be stuck in orbit and come down uncontrolled.
Yeah.
So they have to prove all that. The tip-take transfer, this could be related to the Raptor relight as well. The tip-take transfer is basically transferring fuel from a propellant. I think LOX is the main thing they're going to use. They won't be doing methane on this one, but it's to transfer it from a header tank to a main tank. And I actually saw somewhere, I have it in my slides, that they want to be about 10 tons of the LOX that they want to be able to demonstrate that they can transfer. And to be able to do that, they may need to have an engine relight so that they can settle the propellant enough to make transfer happen. So, so I'm thinking the relight of the Raptor has probably 3 different reasons why they want to do that. And if you go back to the last slide we were at, and then the PEZ door demo, they want to be able to show that they can open the door, and they won't actually deploy anything this time, but they have to show that. And all of that is critical to show that they can get to orbit and operate. And all of this is just IFT3.
Great. Wow. Well, people are enjoying this sort of discussion. James says, please, Ellie and Joe, do this regularly.
Okay. If Ellie can stand me.
I will say we definitely both plan on going to the 3rd Starship launch. Hopefully it's next month.
I hope so. I mean, that's the plan. Right now, from a Starship and a infrastructure standpoint, most of the work SpaceX has to do is finish replacing those 2 tanks with the vaporizers and be able to get the ground support systems back operational. And ship 28 and booster 10 have already done their cryogenics, so we need to see a full stack and a wet dress rehearsal. So those can happen fairly quickly. Then we'll see what the FAA says. And I'm hoping that IFT2, from a standpoint of what happened around the pad, was minimal at best. That if they can show what they found with the booster and the ship, what their mitigation steps are, and have the FAA sign off on that, hopefully, certainly by mid-February is my hope.
Right. And then what is this last slide?
Yeah, this one, I'm not going to go in it completely, but my intention is to just try to show all of the stuff that SpaceX by itself has to do. Either it's normal ops, it's supporting infrastructure to support the Starship booster and Artemis HLS ship development and the tanker. Also, some of the support functions such as building out the Star Factory and getting that in operation, a second tower, which has been confirmed, that's going to go down at Starbase, and some of the parts are already arriving. I still think they're going to have a landing pad of some sort, but it hasn't been mentioned yet. They're upgrading other parts of the OLM. We talked about the tanks and the vaporizers. They are also going to have to develop Roberts Road. And the reason why is not necessarily for 2024. And on the upper left, you can see where I think, and I made a mistake, IFT 6 on the second one should be 7. But, they need to get those 5 done. And that means 5 different ships and 5 different boosters all done this year. In addition to that, they have Starlinks, they have Polaris Dawn, they have the Axiom missions. They're still doing testing at McGregor. They're doing the drone ships. And they're possibly going to be planning a Hubble Space Telescope rescue mission. That's still TBD if that happens or not. They're doing 148 flights this year. So that's their plan for Falcon 9, Falcon Heavy, and who knows in the future. This is sort of like a Gantt chart used by program managers, and that's sort of my background also. But
Well,
I just want to show the amount of stuff that has to happen.
well, hold on here. So you made this for fun?
Yeah.
This is like so much work, and you did it for free.
Not really. It's very high level too. I mean, I used to do it for real in real program management down to details.
Oh my gosh.
Like, for example, if you think spacesuit, it's not just we got to build a spacesuit. It's all of the little pieces and parts that go into that spacesuit. And if you listen to Elon a lot, he talks about prototypes are easy, production is hard, and then when they're on a production line, you have 10,000 different parts, and if one of them doesn't get there in time, the whole thing shuts down. So you have something like this Gantt chart built out for program management, and you track every single thing, and you get a sense of what's going on, where are the bottlenecks, and so forth. Another part of this is something else I've done in my past. Is kind of future planning where, if you look at September 2026, Artemis 3, and then you work your way back and you figure out all of the things that have to happen to make that Artemis 3 go off in September 2026. And this is just some of the stuff that's going on.
Well, Arnie wants to know, where are the slides available? I don't know if you are going to post those on your page or if you...
Well, I did post them on my X account for subscribers and my Patreon. But I may, now that those have been out for a while and everybody's got the previews, maybe I'll put them out on regular X.
I was going to say, I have the link for the Google Slides. But yeah, you put a lot of work into this, and I appreciate it.
Well, maybe in a future one, we can just talk about this particular slide, because really this is telling us what we have to see specifically in 2024 at Starbase.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing because we got a question and I unfortunately took it seriously for a second.
Oh.
I know who this is. Thank you for the super chat. Why is NASA... Well, you read the question.
Why is NASA so concerned with zero gravity agriculture? If the moon is made of cheese, why don't they just eat that? Just hire astronauts who aren't lactose intolerant. That would solve a lot of problems.
I'm blushing because I know who this is.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you for the super chat, though. Wow, I can't believe it's been an hour and a half already. So what are we thinking in terms of time?
It's really up to you and the viewers. If there's anything that people want to ask, with everything that we talked about, we kind of touched on the slides. There, you'll hear from other people some of these specifics. We've already talked about IFT 3 is going to be in February and kind of what their objectives are. But if anybody has any questions, we can do that.
Well, and I do want to say a lot of people are thanking you for all the effort you've put into the presentation. So you guys go support Joe. If you're not, even following him on X or on YouTube, at least do that. It's free to do that. You also have subscriptions on X, and you are way more active than I am. So, and on your Patreon, you show me up, but you do a great job, and you really do, take care of your viewers. So we do appreciate you coming on Ellie in Space.
Well, thank you. I like helping people see the bigger picture, the context. It's one thing to hear Artemis 3 delayed. Okay, but why? And right. I'm trying to help people understand why.
Right. Well, there was a question. Let me see if I can find it. Gosh, there's so many questions. Here we go from Ross. He wants to know, well, you can read it.
If Booster 10 and Ship 28 are flight ready by the end of January, do you think the FAA are sufficiently resourced to grant the launch license for Flight 3 by the end of February? I think so, because when you look at mishaps like this would be considered for IFT2, people think that the FAA has this team of people that go to Starbase and they look at everything, they write the reports, they come up with the mitigation steps and all that. And really, that's not what happens. The company, in this case, SpaceX, does most of the work. They research all of their data. They look at the inputs that they got. They look at everything from sensors to video to whatever they need to be able to come up with, oh, this is what happened. And in that all hands update to SpaceX, Elon, for example, mentioned a little bit about why Ship 25 ended up not making it to orbit. But those kinds of things are put into their report, and they put it all together. They submit it to the FAA. Right. And the FAA reviews that, and then if they have any questions or any clarifications or whatever, then they work with SpaceX back and forth, and then ultimately they come out and they say, this is what our decision is. So because of that, it's not, I don't know if resourcing is really that big of an issue. It's really more of how much does SpaceX get together and when do they get at the FAA to allow them to look through that? Well,
Joe, I do want to ask you sort of your generation versus my generation question.
Old people.
This viewer says he did low-key cook. He's referring to you. And basically, do you know what the slang term like let him cook means? Or do you know what this comment means about you, that you're cooking?
I can guess, but I'm not sure. You let me know.
No, what's your guess?
He wants me to keep going.
Well, the idea, let him cook, is a slang phrase that means to freely let a person do something that they're good at. So he's impressed with your, your knowledge and your kind of speaking about this. So he's complimenting you. You
thank you for Fed coin. Thank you very much. Does that mean something I don't know?
What about if I say, Joe, you're the GOAT?
I know what that is.
What is that?
GOAT is a term for greatest of all time. Wow.
Okay. Good job. Good job. I need to make sure.
I'm old, but I'm not out of touch.
Okay. Well, I think the word of the year last year, it's like officially become a word, which is unfortunate. Riz. Do you know what Riz means?
No, I don't.
RIZZ. Does anyone know what Riz means? If you don't, look it up. It means style, charm, or attractiveness.
So you use it like an adjective. Ellie, you are so Riz.
It would be like he gets so many girls. He just has a lot of Riz.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Yeah, it was the 2023 word of the year. So
really? Okay.
Trying to educate guys. This is my contribution.
Yeah. I'm just curious, where did that come from? Was it from a show or what?
I think it's from just the internet and TikTok. I think TikTok and it's actually short for charisma.
Oh, okay. So where Riz comes from? Charisma.
Right. So someone has high levels of charisma. That's been,
Riz
down to he got Riz. You got Riz. Yeah. Anyway, well, we've gone off topic a lot. We've been able to watch video that neither of us have seen. I think that was actually really cool. And I think we should do this more. I like watching stuff, kind of pausing it, interpreting it, etc.
Sounds like a plan. Oh, one thing I forgot. This actually kind of goes with what we were saying today, but it goes back to when Starship was first picked for the HLS.
Oh,
remember that?
Yes, immensely high risk. Definitely.
Oh, cool. Well, I guess my closing thoughts on this is, we've been waiting for a very long time to return to space in a big way, to go beyond low Earth orbit, to go really explore. I think the reason why we want to go to space is a very human thing. We want to know what's out there. We want to go. We want to have a place to go, not just orbit around the Earth. So I think it's time, and I hope that we continue to develop that way. And notwithstanding some of the stuff that we just talked about today, I'm hoping that we are on a path for that success, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, and I want to leave you guys with this too, and I posted it on X. During that meeting, someone said, whoever controls space will control the destiny of this Earth. And that is just such a powerful statement. And this is, the time that we live in, and we're seeing it all unfold. And this is not a movie. This is it. And it's an exciting time. It's like you were saying, there's been such a lull for many decades, and here we are. And I think 2024, like you mentioned, it's not only going to be a critical year, but it's going to be a really exciting and probably just a year that's going to be hard for either of us to keep track of all the developments.
Well, that's a great thing. And, I would rather us move forward with an imperfect solution than to wait till we find a perfect solution.
Right. Well, right. Exactly. And thank you, Ross. He says, hope your voice gets better soon. I just woke up this morning and I was like, wow, it sounds like I have like laryngitis. So yeah, that's the only thing that was missing from this discussion was a pretty voice. I'm sorry you've had to listen to me. Yeah, but we're doing our best. As you can see, hold on, maybe I'm covering it in the chair. There we go. Just moved in, so I haven't set this up yet. Got to do that. And I actually I can tell you guys now, I was able to interview Tom Mueller. So Joe, who is Tom?
Tom Mueller is one of the founding members of SpaceX and pretty much responsible for the design, development, and the operation of the Merlin engines that power every Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy.
Right. And he has now, spun off his own company, Impulse Space. They just made an announcement today, actually. And so I have the full discussion, but I need to edit it still. Maybe I should just put the full discussion on my Patreon and my X subscribers while I'm trying to catch up with all the editing. But it was really an honor to interview him. I've been trying to get an interview with him for like over a year and a half. And I really see, he's like, Elon is probably the most important for SpaceX, but I would say he's equally, if not the second most important to the existence of SpaceX.
Yeah, well, I would think that he definitely is in the running for the person that built the most successful rocket engine ever.
Right.
And that's only going to grow with the amount of launches that Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy are going to do.
Right.
Incredible,
Yeah. So you know what? I'm going to edit just like the rough draft right now and post it up for my X subscribers, because I don't do enough for you guys, and I'm sorry about that, and my Patreon people, and that'll give me more time. The problem with why I can't finish it today is because I need to record some voiceover, and I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it like this. That sounds terrible. No, everyone's going to click off my video. They're going to be like, ew, gross. So I'm going to compromise. I just have to edit out one part, because I think it was like, he probably wouldn't want it in there. But if you are a subscriber on X or Patreon, I'll have that up in the next hour. So
awesome.
Be watching for it. But thank you, Joe. I am going to suggest we sign off, just because I got to try and get my voice back, and this probably isn't helping.
No problem. Well, today was kind of unexpected with that breaking news, so kind of went all over the place. But.
Well, and you know what? You might actually want this link, and I'm going to put the link in the comments if anyone wants to watch this video, because you actually didn't have this link either, and I'm going to text it to you too. But essentially, you can see the almost 2 hour, meeting and discussion where those quotes came from, because we still haven't found that portion of the video where the quotes are. So if you guys want to watch that, that is in the comments, and I need to edit right now. So
Awesome.
go team, go. You're like the closest thing I have to a coworker, by the way.
Oh, really?
Like, you've helped me with so many launches. We've collaborated, it's like, yeah, it's good. And thank you to my patron who bought us those tickets, by the way, VIP tickets for the Astro Awards. I'm very glad that you were able to come. I kind of invited you last minute, and that was really, really kind of you. You know who you are. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, I am going to edit that, and it's been great hanging out with you guys. We'll do more of these. Maybe we can like plan on weekly or bi-weekly.
Whatever works. As long as it's not on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.
Wednesday and Friday. Okay, so, well, we're on Wednesday today, but that's right. You said it was going to be pretty cold.
Yeah, it just now went above freezing. So drones and freezing weather and wind don't go together very well. The battery life goes down quite a bit. And not only that, but on the iPad that I use to control it, that just kills the battery really quickly. So.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I've been like making, customer service calls, and people from all around the country, they're like, it's really cold there in Texas right now, huh? And it's like everywhere around. I saw some article, I think it was during the Chiefs game, that a bunch of people had to be taken to the hospital because they, it was like the game started at -4 degrees, I think Fahrenheit, it said. Anyway, very cold. You should not be watching a football game, and you're not the one running around on the field. You're the one. Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Although I still think that I do like a break from the terrible summer that we had here. It was incredibly hot. And as long as it's not raining or snowing, like, you can layer, and I don't know, I don't think it's that big of a deal.
Yeah. Well, I hate to tell you, because you've only been here in Austin not even a year yet.
Almost.
Yeah, but around March to April is when we get all the heavy rains.
Oh.
That's coming up.
I was here for that because I had just broken my leg.
Yeah. And you were inside most of the time. If I remember correctly, did you not have a big water leak too?
I had a mini flood. Yeah. I haven't fully moved out yet. I'm like, they better not charge me for that, because that was some BS. We went to Starbase for 2 weeks, like camping out for the first Starship flight, and I came back and there was like kind of a flood in my living room, and it took forever to clean it up. Anyway, that's crazy that I've been in Austin for almost a year now. I think the year is either February 12th or 13th. So maybe I should do like a year in Austin recap episode. If you guys would be interested in that, let me know. If not, I won't make it, because that's going to be more effort. But I think it's been a crazy, crazy year. I mean, like crazy, absolutely crazy, like major canon events. That's another kind of Zoomer term, right? This like major life event.
Yeah.
But like breaking my leg, Elon Musk subscribing to me, reuniting with my high school sweetheart, trying out stand-up comedy, moving to Austin. There's a lot of stuff.
Watching Starship and not having to worry about running and hiding, which you're concerned about.
2 Starship launches, getting selected for 0G. However, I still have not done that.
By the way, is there any update on that?
Well, we are scheduled for Kennedy Space Center. So I'm flying to Orlando. The date for the flight is February 23rd, I believe. So
that's close to the next crew launch too, to the ISS.
And, Ross says, let's hope the rains don't affect the eclipse on the 8th of April.
I agree.
So you're going to scold me, but I'm not going to be in the country for the eclipse.
Oh, well.
Do you think I'm missing a good, I've already seen a total solar eclipse, and I had to like book complicated plans, itinerary to go to Japan.
Yeah.
And so my thought is that I should just see the next total solar eclipse in Iceland in 2026.
Okay. Well, I guarantee you this: if you cancel your plans to be here, it'll be cloudy. If you don't, it's going to be a beautiful day.
Well, I'm just gonna keep it the way it is. I'm going to Japan. I'm going in early April so that hopefully I can get some of the cherry blossoms. But if you haven't seen a total solar eclipse, you should. If you are going to be, in an area or you have time to go to the band of totality, it is worth it.
Wear the right glasses.
Yes, definitely. Okay, well, that's a wrap. Thank you as always, and I'm going to end the stream.
All right. Take care.